Alright, Lobries and Gentlegrams, in today's episode of Lobry in Gentleland, the belligerent, balding, bearded buffoon is delicately dodging drones, damaging the future decades of diss songs with defamation cases, currently clobbered by Kung Fu Kenny who perfectly appointed him, a champagne petition prom queen poppy, and a sensitive suing, spiraling, sexy red stunt double sad boy, courthouse Karen culturally cosplaying as a Canadian phony Montana, regretfully reminiscing on his rejection from Rihanna, making Mexican music with atrociously astonishing, awfully insulting accents, all the while acknowledging his heir Adonis postpartumly prompted by Pusha T profusely planting the plot of land for the gavel-guzzling Graham's Canadian casket so Kendrick could cook up a classic and bury the casket, but never the hatchet. And if these rhymes in my prime haven't gotten you to like and subscribe, then you might as well leave, because there will never be a better time. Now, a congratulations is in order for the OVHO Courthouse Karens, because after a long few days of concocting crazy conspiracies correlated to the crumbling sales of Drake's new Sexy Sleepy Songs album, the Canadian crybaby may have just caught his first W since way back in April of 2024 when the defamation detonator told Kendrick to drop, because after lawsuits and spankings from the small-statured assassin against the spiraling sensitive sexy red stunt double on the Super Bowl stage, it was looking like the future for the frail 69 goddess was full of flops and failures, but funny enough, his fan base is fully functional and his new album might actually not do so bad. We cannot say that he's officially been Ja ruled just yet. Or can we? Because Drake is in a very interesting position right now, and his new album with Party Next Door might concoct the lowest first week he's ever had for an album release. And we know about the obsession that the OVHO totem pole riders have with numbers, so if he ends up selling less than The Weeknd, less than Kendrick, less than all his fragile ops, it's gonna be a strange look for Drake, because his whole career he's had an obsession with numbers, and his fans judge his legacy, judge his greatness off the numbers he produces. And especially after the feet whooping that the fragile, fraudulent, feathery, phony Montana experienced from Kendrick, all eyes are on him to continue being at the top of the charts to prove he's still deep in his OVHO's hearts. So we're gonna look into all the deranged conspiracies that his OVHO fan base was making up when it looked like his Spotify numbers were low and his new album wouldn't sell much, and we're also gonna look into the first week projections for this new project and determine if this is a W or a flop for the OVHO freaky frontliner. But before we get into that, for anyone telling you that Drake is not a tough guy, forget about everything he said pertaining to him not being cool in high school.
Drake claims he wasn't cool in high school. What made you uncool?
I just always felt like an outsider. I went all Jewish school. Like I was raised in a Jewish household, I would say.
This phony Montana watched his father have trouble at the Canadian border.
I saw my dad get arrested by like a SWAT team at the border, you know, for trying to cross over. I've seen things that didn't make me happy. They were character building, and that's why I think people in the hood can still connect with what I'm saying, even though
And I've been to that Canadian border on road trips with my friends. Like, they're not messing around there. They'll ask you, why are you visiting America? How long do you plan to stay? Are you carrying over $10,000 on your person? It's some very scary stuff. I guess it's stuff like that that really made Drake the tough Taylor Swift twin, the sexy red stunt double that he is today. Nah, but on a serious note, why was there a casket that said R.I.P. Drake outside of DJ Khaled's house?
I like what Drake like. I like what Drake like. I like what Drake like. I like what Drake like.
We know that Khaled just did $1 million album trailer for his new album, announcing that there'd be 2 Drake songs on it, and Drake commented saying the only Drake songs he's getting are from Drake Bell. But I don't think that warrants something like this, especially when Drake is all the way out in Australia. What's Khaled gonna do, take a jet ski there? I think he's too busy in McDonald's to worry about Drake.
Ain't a movie night, ain't nothing like a McDonald's french fries. And a McDonald's fillet of fish.
On another note, the goofiest goon glazer of the Gaveling Graham was released from prison, top 5, and he's already up to no good, following the footsteps of Drake's fragile op Kanye's tweets by posting on Instagram himself saying, "Free Diddy." Or actually, Free Daddy. People forget that Top 5 was the same guy that, as a 16-year-old kid, was rolling around Toronto shirtless so much that Drake had to give him the nickname Shirt Off Shawty.
Like I'm shirt off shorty. top five, top five, top five.
But I'm not insinuating that there's a weird connection between Diddy, Drake, and this shirtless young adult. Everything is all alleged here. Also, to anyone saying that people are going too hard on Drake or Kendrick is kicking his back in too much, I think we need a time machine to remember how dirty Meek was done during his beef with Drake way back in 2015. It's tweets like this that don't make me feel bad for what Drake is going through right now, especially considering the fact that Meek Mill never filed the lawsuit about it. Oh, and Drake is still crashing out on his tour. Someone threw a DeMar DeRozan jersey on stage while he was performing, and this was his reaction. But alright, we got some Canadian courthouse Karen clowning out of the way. I also want to give Drake a little bit of props in this video. We don't only Drake hate. Now listen, unless he drops that lawsuit, I can't actually stand up for anything he's been doing, but I find it interesting. Before the lawsuit, before the sexy sleepy songs, before the beef with Kendrick, it seemed like Drake was seriously considering retirement. This is what he had to say about it in 2022.
I think I'm at the point now where I just want to I feel like maybe we talked about this the other day, but I feel like I'm kind of introducing the concept in my mind of a graceful exit.
And right after For All the Dogs came out, he announced that he'd be taking a long break from the studio to work out some health issues.
I probably won't make music for a little bit, I'm gonna be honest. I got some other things I need to do for some other people that I made promises to, but I probably won't make music for a little bit. I'm gonna be real with you. I need to focus on my health first and foremost, and I'll talk about that soon enough. Nothing crazy, but just I want people to be healthy in life. I've been having the craziest problems for years with my stomach. So I'm gonna lock the door in the studio for a little bit. I don't even know what a little bit is. Maybe a year or something, or maybe a little longer.
So for Drake to take the bait after Kendrick delivered that warning shot with Like That, I mean, I'm happy he did, because he charged Kendrick up to deliver one of the most superb performances we've ever witnessed in rap battle history. But it also showed us that Drake was not afraid of the smoke. Should he have been? Maybe. In retrospect, if he retired after For All the Dogs and never answered Kendrick's shots on Like That, imagine how different hip-hop would be today. Would we see Kendrick at the Super Bowl? Would we have gotten GNX? Would we have heard Kendrick finally click up with Mustard? I bet Drake wishes he did retire, but drop a thank you, Drizzy, in the comments for being the catalyst of Kendrick closing the doors on the Canadian casket. And on a side note, anyone criticizing Kendrick's performance at the Super Bowl, I thought this was interesting. Remember how on Drake's very first diss track, he was talking about Top Dogg owning 50% of the profits of Kendrick's music? Well, GNX was the first album Kendrick released through his own label PG Lang. And what were the majority of the songs that were performed at that Super Bowl? What album saw a 250% spike in its sales following the Super Bowl and went on to sell more in its 12th week of release than Drake is about to sell in his first week of release with his latest album? That would be none other than GNX, the album that Kendrick owns the masters to. So just remember, everything is calculated. And all those Drake disses are aging like milk. Drop, 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 and Top told you drop and give me 50. The only thing dropping is the Canadian casket. But now here is where the OV Ho Courthouse Karen conspiracy theories came in, because when Drake released his new project, aside from his fan base, it hadn't got the best reception, and its numbers reflected that. It debuted on the US Spotify charts with over 28 million streams in its first day of release, which was obviously lower than GNX, even lower than The Weeknd's new album, and surprisingly, even lower than Kanye's independent Vultures 1 release, which was actually blackballed due to his insane comments about the Mustache Man. But it didn't stop there. In the second day of that new Drake album's release, it saw a 44% decrease in streams, going from 28 million to 16 million in its second day, and then it dropped another 60% in its third day with only 11 million streams, showing that the numbers were getting lower and lower day by day. Now, the OV Hoes were absolutely up in arms about this, refusing to accept the fact that maybe people just genuinely did not like the music, or they were just kind of over Drake, and instead they chalked it up to crazy conspiracies about Spotify and UMG teaming up to blackball Drake, hiding his music from the public due to the fact that he tied them up in a defamation lawsuit, claiming they unethically promoted and pushed Kendrick's song Not Like Us.
I'm glad that Drake's getting the recognition he deserves. What I don't like, though, is I don't like when Spotify and Apple Music, how they're doing Drake. They're trying to put
no, what's good with that?
They're trying to put Kendrick's music in his playlist stuff and
I've seen that.
unchart him on certain things. It's just they're pushing this. Look, Kendrick Lamar, back in the day, he has hits.
He has some tracks.
Yes.
But so does Meek Mill or Big Sean. Kendrick has some tracks.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I could name I could name 10, but I don't know if I could name name 20.
Can you name 5 songs off his new album?
No.
Exactly. That's my point, though.
I covered and debunked most of these insane conspiracies in my previous video. I'll link that in the description. But basically, they were disproven by the fact that Drake and Party Next Door were all over the Spotify and Apple Music homepages, all over the different hip-hop and R&B major playlists. But because the numbers were simply low, Drake fans did everything they could to paint this narrative that some massive blacklisting malpractice was going on. Because of course, if you're getting blacklisted, you're still going to be all over the biggest playlists, right? The rap caviars and all that. That makes complete sense. But one OVHO tweeted out a screenshot of the top global digital artists ranked and all the streaming points they're getting on different platforms like Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, etc. They pointed out a large discrepancy between Drake's Spotify points versus his Apple Music points, especially compared to the close numbers that Kendrick had. And they said clearest proof on Spotify blacklisting Drake / Party Next Door and their new album. Compare top artists, Apple Music and Spotify number differences. It'll be small. Now look at Drake P&D numbers and you'll see the Spotify one is way lower than Apple. This is significant. How can they both be? Even if you're a Kendrick fan, this stuff is just wrong. Now, firstly, I don't know how these points are calculated, but a couple things, right? Number one, the day that this album was released, Drake actually had more streams on Spotify that day than Kendrick did. But somehow Kendrick's Spotify points were higher than Drake's. If this was really some big conspiracy and not just an inaccuracy with this one website's portrayal of the different points that both artists had on Spotify, then how would you explain Drake having more streams than Kendrick on Spotify for the first day of this album's release? And secondly, we can likely chalk this up to this website just not accurately calculating the numbers for new album releases, because when Kendrick released GNX, the same exact thing happened to him. He shot up to number 1 on this global digital ranking chart, but you can see he actually had a bigger discrepancy between his Apple Music and Spotify points than Drake is having right now. And GNX ended up doing great in terms of Spotify performance. So this is not some big conspiracy. This is not Spotify blackballing Drake. His face is plastered on all their playlists, and his songs are still racking up streams, just not as much as his previous albums. That's why all of his OVHO conspiracy courthouse Karens are trying to make the case that this is some calculated attack from the industry versus just Drake not doing the same numbers he used to do. Now, Lawbreeze and Gentlegrams, I want to tell you guys about something that almost seems too good to be true, alright? Let me give you a little glimpse into my life. When I'm not making this content for you guys, I have a disgusting addiction to my phone. My daily screen time is higher than Drake on that album cover, higher than Snoop off the edibles. So if you guys suffer that same addiction as me, I want to put you onto something that's going to change your life. FreeCash.com is a program that partners with mobile games that are looking for more users to play their games, and they will literally pay you to play their games for free. All you got to do is sign up using the QR code you see on the screen or using the link in the description of this video. You make an account super easy. All you got to do is put in your email, create a password, verify your email, and then you're good to go. And they got a bunch of games. My favorite is the Monopoly Go, because we're always on the go trying to make some money. Once you make an account, you just click the game you want to play, follow the directions that they give you. The directions are super easy. Usually you just got to download the game and start playing. So it's about time you put that phone addiction to good use. Again, use the QR code you see on the screen or the link in my description. Create an account and you could start making more than $150 just to play a game on your phone. Now here's some more OVHO conspiracy theories for you. Kendrick, if you guys didn't know, became the first rapper to hit over 100 million monthly listeners on Spotify, beating Drake's record by almost 20 million listeners. And of course, the OVHOs being obsessed with numbers couldn't just chalk that up to Kendrick actually performing better than Drake from a commercial perspective. Instead, had to be some big conspiracy. So they display both Drake and Kendrick's total streams, their followers, and their monthly listeners. You could see that Drake's total streams throughout his entire career are 109 billion, his followers right now are 96.1 million, and his monthly listeners are only 77.9 million. Meanwhile, Kendrick's total streams are 43 billion, his followers are 37 million, but his monthly listeners are way higher than Drake at 100 million. It's actually at around 102 million right now. He's getting double the amount of new monthly listeners on a daily basis than Drake is, even though Drake just released a new album. And again, instead of it being that Kendrick might be getting more mainstream attention than Drake right now, this user implied something fishy going on with the Spotify algorithms, saying, what kind of algorithm makes something like this possible? So let me explain it. Essentially, Drake has a massive back catalog, right? Larry Jackson's on record saying that Drake's catalog earns more streams than the entirety of the streams from all the 60s, 70s, and 80s music combined. Not to mention the fact that Drake has like 15 different albums right now on Spotify. Kendrick has like half of that with around 7 or 8 projects on Spotify. So that's why it makes sense that in terms of total streams, Drake has 109 billion total, while Kendrick has 43 billion total. Kendrick has a 50% smaller catalog, and Drake is a massive global pop artist. Obviously, in terms of total career, he has more streams. Same thing with followers, right? Drake has more followers on Spotify because he has a bigger catalog, a catalog with more hits. The difference in their monthly listeners is strictly attributed to the fact that Kendrick is currently, in this day and age, getting more attention than Drake is today, in the present day. Monthly listeners signifies unique users who have engaged with your music at least once in a 28-day window. The emphasis here is on unique. A single listener streaming your track multiple times within this period still only counts as one monthly listener. A new monthly listener just means a new user who has checked out your music or your Spotify page within the last month. Kendrick just did a performance in front of 30% of America at the Super Bowl. Forget the diss tracks. All of his catalog is shooting up the charts like crazy right now because he's had more eyeballs on him in the last week than arguably any rapper has ever had on them in history. While his total streams aren't as much as Drake's, it makes complete sense that his monthly listeners are right now a lot higher than Drake's because a lot more people are checking out Kendrick's music today for the first time than they are with Drake. Like, take this for example. On the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100 this week, Kendrick has 5 different songs in the top 10 alone. Not Like Us is at number 1, Luther at number 2, TV Off at number 3, Squabble Up at number 5, and 30 for 30 with SZA at number 10. He has 4 songs just in the top 5 of the Billboard Hot 100. Tons of new listeners are checking him out for the very first time, which makes sense after a performance like the Super Bowl, which also makes sense why he's crushing Drake's monthly listeners, breaking the record for having the most of any rapper in history. All while doing it, staying authentic to his artistry and bringing real rap to the forefront of the mainstream. That's why I'm putting such an emphasis on the numbers, because it's so substantial when you see music like this topping the charts. We've never seen a bar-focused diss record like this go number 1 on the Billboard. We've never seen a rapper straight rapping like this over West Coast mustard production, collecting top 10 hits like they're Pokemon in the wild, setting an amazing precedent that labels should show a lot more interest and investment into rappers, and emphasizes that people still care about lyricism, they still care about storytelling and artistry. When you put that at the forefront, performing songs like Man at the Garden or Euphoria on a stage like the Super Bowl, yeah, you might get some backlash, it might stir up some controversy, but at the end of the day, you're just bringing more eyeballs than ever before onto this type of music, which has been experiencing a massive slump in the mainstream and investment from the labels over the last few years. Kendrick told us he's not the savior, but he's really reviving mainstream hip-hop with everything he's been doing over the last year. It's ironic also, with him holding the number 1, 2, and 3 positions on the Billboard Hot 100, he becomes only the second rapper to ever do so in history, with the only other rapper doing this being Drake in 2021, charting What's Next at number 1, Wants and Needs at number 2, and Lemon Pepper Freestyle at number 3. Also, with Not Like Us going back to the number 1 spot on the Billboard charts in its 30th week, that song now earns the longest gap between weeks at the number 1 spot on the Hot 100 for a non-holiday song in this entire century. To put that in simpler terms, because of the way we consume music now with streaming, it makes it a lot easier for songs to shoot back up to number 1 long after they were released. That's why during the holidays, when everyone's listening to Christmas music, all the Christmas music now shoots back up to the top of the charts because everyone's streaming it, and streams is how we calculate chart positions. But aside from those holiday songs, we never usually see a song that had previously been at number 1 on the charts come back months or years later and go back to number 1 on the charts. Kendrick and Not Like Us is the first song to do this in this entire century. Oh, and then some more OVHO conspiracies. His fans were claiming that his name was removed from his album with Party Next Door, and you only saw it being an album by Party Next Door. And stuff like this is just a glitch in the system, right? Like, if you go look up that album right now, you'll see both Drake and Party Next Door's name. Stuff like this happens. It's not some sort of elaborate plan to eliminate Drake. Apple Music was literally tweeting out links to the album saying that it broke the record for biggest streaming day for an R&B album on their platform in history. I have Apple Music. Their faces were all over the platform for this whole week. There's no conspiracy going on. But they don't even know which platform to be more mad at, Spotify or Apple Music, because his numbers just haven't been great at both. Obviously, he mentioned Spotify in his defamation lawsuit against UMG, so that's the platform that the OVHOs chose to attack and make excuses for Drake flopping. But then you look at the Apple Music charts, and the only songs blocking Drake's new album from hitting the number 1 are Luther or Not Like Us. So it's like, which platform can you be mad at? And what's crazy is if you look at total number of streams for both Drake and Kendrick in 2025, there's a difference of only about 700,000 streams total. Both of them racking up about 250 million streams so far this year. And what's funny is Drake has been the highest selling rapper for the last 10 years. If Kendrick continues on this pace, especially if he drops a second album, which he's been hinting at, he very well might break Drake's 10-year record of being the most consumed rapper every single year, and again, just marking that massive shift that we're seeing within the direction of hip-hop. But yeah, this has been a rough week for the OV hoes, with them threatening lawsuits just like their commander-in-chief every day, threatening new Twitter users with lawsuits. Even this parody account, Daily Noid, which I actually got tricked by because they had posted a fake screenshot of Party Next Door's Instagram and claimed that he said that, his new album with Drake is something to have sex to and not to analyze. He never said that. This is a troll account. So they also tweeted out saying, Drake is reportedly upset about Kendrick being the first rapper to reach 100 million listeners on Spotify. And an OVHO tweeted out, you can delete this, but still sending it to his legal team. Have the day you deserve. It's a sad day when you think about the fact that Drake has made suing cool and acceptable to his fans. But again, Kendrick's monthly listeners just keep rising even with Drake's new album on the charts, as he's collecting about 1.3 million new monthly listeners per day, while Drake is only getting about 40% of that with 500k new monthly listeners per day. And they're all saying, oh, Kendrick's only breaking records on Spotify, not Apple Music. Well, take a look at this. Kendrick Lamar has been the only artist to spend 4 months at number 1 on the US Apple Music chart in 2024. Not Like Us became the longest running song at number 1 on US Apple Music this decade with 97 days at number 1. It was also the longest running song at number 1 on the global Apple Music chart this decade with 87 days. It was number 1 in 55 countries. GNX occupied the entire top 12 of the US Apple Music when it first released. Unlike Drake's new album, it was number 1 in 112 countries, the second longest running rap album at number 1 on worldwide Apple Music albums chart with 40 days, and the fourth longest running rap album at number 1 on US Apple Music with 33 days. So, OV hosts, who are you going to sue, Spotify or Apple Music? Because Kendrick is breaking records on both platforms. Even in its 12th week of release, GNX is still getting more daily streams than Drake's new album just 4 days after it came out, with GNX getting 25.1 million streams per day and Some Sexy Sleepy Songs only getting 24.8 million streams per day. On a side note, it'd be crazy if GNX in its 12th week outsold Drake's new album in its first week, but that likely won't happen. We'll touch on that shortly. But some more poetic justice, no pun intended. Kendrick's Super Bowl halftime performance has more views on YouTube than the song that started it all, the song where Drake and J. Cole proclaimed that their link-up was as big as the Super Bowl. Kendrick's Super Bowl halftime performance now has more views on YouTube than Drake and J. Cole's first-person shooter music video on YouTube, and that was released over a year ago. And of course, the OV hoes are also mad at Apple Music for promoting the Super Bowl halftime performance, even though it was an Apple Music Super Bowl halftime performance. They did the same thing for Usher, all the other Super Bowl halftime shows that they hosted. Not everything is some grand conspiracy, OV hoes, but after a long 4 days of fighting, threatening lawsuits, raging at all these streaming platforms over Twitter, the OV hoes can finally rest peacefully because the first week album numbers, or predictions I should say, came in for Drake and Party Next Door, and they're actually not predicted to have such a bad first week. They're projected to sell 250,000 units in the first week, with 28,000 of those coming from physical sales, so anything from buying it on iTunes to buying the CD or buying the vinyl, and around 222,000 of those coming from streams on Spotify and Apple Music, the same places that they claimed were conspiring against Drake. So clap it up, OVHOs. All your whining on Twitter finally paid off. This is a W, in my opinion. This is a W. I was wrong because in a video from a couple days ago, I had told you guys that my predictions were this album was not going to sell more than 150 to 210,000 copies, just based off the few numbers that we had seen, because again, GNX was outperforming it on Spotify just 4 days after it came out, but my numbers ended up being off by about 40,000. This is what I said in my last video. I have this knack for predicting numbers. I could be very off. This is literally me just going off the top of my head, but I don't see this Drake and Party album selling more than 210,000 copies in the first week. I'd say it's anywhere from 160 to 210. And this would mark Drake's lowest selling first week of all time. So if the first week predictions do come out as I'm editing this video, I'll throw in a little commentary right here. Now, did he get Ja Ruled? It's tough to say, right? Because during the height of the 50 Cent and Ja Rule beef, Ja Rule was still putting out a couple albums and they all performed somewhat decently. Now, there was a big slump between his projects that were released at the height of his popularity versus the ones that were released at the height of his tensions between 50 Cent and Eminem. To put it into perspective, 50 Cent was at the height of his career around 2003 when he released Get Rich or Die Trying, and Ja Rule also released an album that year, Blood in My Eye, which even with his beef with 50, it still performed decently, selling 140,000 copies in the first week. He put another album out the next year in 2004 titled Rule, which sold 165,000 copies in the first week. Then it was all downhill from there. Kind of a slow burnout. He was basically selling less and less with each album, and what we're seeing with Drake could mirror the same exact thing, because even by selling 250,000 copies, this is going to mark one of the lowest first week sales of Drake's entire career. The only ones that would be lower were his mixtape / playlist in 2020, Dark Lane demo tapes, and his dance album, which was only 12 songs, Honestly Nevermind, in 2022. Now, this is a duet album with Party Next Door, who's not a very high-selling artist. It's also, predominantly a quote-unquote R&B album. I like to call it an AI R&B album, but there's no argument to make over the fact that if this was a predominantly hip-hop album, it would have sold a lot more. So it makes sense that the numbers are a bit lower considering it's, AI R&B. But this could very well still mark the beginning of the fall-off, right? Because him doing 250,000 is lower than any other collaboration album he did in the past, lower than Her Loss with 21 Savage, lower than What a Time to Be Alive with Future. It's lower than any Kendrick album since all the way back in 2012 with his first album, Good Kid, Mad City, and that's approaching Diamond. It's lower than Future and Metro Boomin's collab album, We Don't Trust You, from last year. That sold a little bit above 250,000. GNX did around 320, and that had half the songs, right? You gotta also take into account, this album is 21 songs. The more songs on an album, the more streams that the whole album gets, the easier it typically is for an album to have higher sales when there's more songs. GNX only had 12, and it still sold much above this album with 320,000 units in the first week. And if you want to go into conspiracies, it's a little weird to me that Vultures One by Kanye and Ty Dolla $ign opened up with more streams in its first week on Spotify than this new Drake album, but somehow this new Drake album is about to outsell Vultures in the first week. Are Party and Drake skewing the numbers over at Spotify? Should Kanye go ahead and sue them? I don't know, but again, is this a W or an L for Drake? I think it's a combination of both, but I'm more so leaning into it being a W. We gotta show Drake some respect here, okay? Let's look at both sides of the coin. Before all the Ovi hoes say, oh, this was an album with no promotion, or oh, he got blackballed and he still pulled off these numbers. No, he didn't get blackballed. He was all over every playlist. I debunked that in the last video. I showed you guys some other examples in this video. There was no blackballing going on. If there was, you could best believe there would be another lawsuit from the Champagne Petition Poppy. And you definitely cannot say there was no promotion for this album, all right? He announced this album on a stream with XQC, who's like the biggest streamer in the world. He did that way back in September or October. Then he went on stream with Adin Ross to talk about the album. Now he's on a whole tour where he's talking about the album. He also participated in the biggest rap beef of the century, with the whole world looking to see what his next move will be. That in itself is promotion for this album. And funny enough, Kendrick actually gave him a bit of a stimulus package because he literally said Drake's name on the Super Bowl stage. All publicity is good publicity. Drake knew that even if it looked bad, him saying, "Say Drake, I hear you like I'm young" on that Super Bowl stage, he's still saying the name Drake in front of 100 million people who are watching. That in and of itself is bringing new eyeballs onto Drake. So I guess you could say Kendrick officially inherited the Drake stimulus package from Drake and turned it into the Kung Fu Kenny stimulus package. But yeah, Drake is calculated, right? He knew releasing this the week after the Super Bowl when all eyes were on him versus Kendrick. That in and of itself, mixed with the whole beef in general, is promotion for this album. This album was definitely promoted. It wasn't a surprise release like GNX. Kendrick literally just released GNX on a random Friday morning, no announcement. Party and Drake announced this album months ago, were on every single playlist, and you knew it was dropping at midnight on Friday. Plus, they were selling CDs and vinyls for the first time in Drake's career in the last 10 years. There was work that went in to make sure this album did not flop. And by all means, it did not. To defend Drake here, again, for the type of project this was, a predominantly R&B album with a couple hip-hop tracks. Obviously, again, he still had to talk about the beef on one song. drawing attention to the whole album just based off that one record, and leaving Party Next Door off damn near the biggest hits off this album, like Gimme a Hug and Nokia. Even though this was still a predominantly Drake album, this was still his technically return album since the beef, he still took it in somewhat of an unconventional direction, making it mainly an R&B project. And for it to still sell 250,000 copies in the first week, with all that has transpired with the horrible stain Kendrick left on Drake's reputation, 250K is still a very solid first week. One of his lowest in his entire career, but solid numbers for a collab tape with Party Next Door released at arguably the lowest point in your career. But for you OV hoes who want to talk like Drake is the king of numbers, let's put this into perspective. If Kendrick released a 21-song album tomorrow that was majority R&B, you could even say a collab tape with someone who's, let's say, as big as Party Next Door, like a Giveon or a Daniel Caesar, and there was one song on that album where Kendrick spoke on the beef, just like, Gimme the Hug was the one song on this album where Drake spoke on the beef, would Kendrick's version of this album sell more than Drake and Party Next Door's just did? I think so. And also, first week sales aren't all that matters, right? I'm talking about this because it is a good barometer test to see, if Drake lost a big chunk of his fan base, or if they're all still here no matter what type of music he puts out or what type of stain Kendrick leaves on his reputation. Like Drake has said in his own music, only real music's gonna last. All that other BS is here today and gone tomorrow. We'll see how this album does in the long term. To be fair again to Drake, I definitely think there's a couple songs here that could be long-term hits like Nokia or Die Tryin'. Overall, most of the album to me was a snooze fest, but there's some okay songs like Somebody Who Loves Me. But again, the Ja Rule effect, right? We didn't see it happen all in one shot. He still had the opportunity to release a couple albums, none of them showing strong enough evolution for him to remain a dominant force within the mainstream. And Drake seems to be following a similar path, right? This album didn't get the greatest reviews, but ultimately, Drake is still a massive figure and it's still going to pull off decent numbers. Just like Ja Rule's did right after his beef with 50 Cent. So really, ultimately, it's all about the long term. Now, let's give Drake a couple more W's, right? So he just got Party Next Door, his first #1 album in his entire career. Finally, he took that guy out of the sweatshop.
Party. The biggest. Big P&D, man.
God. Also, with this album going #1, Drake will officially beat Jay-Z for the rapper with the most #1s in Billboard history. And you also got to ask yourself if you do consider this album R&B, which again, the biggest songs off this thing are not R&B songs, right? Gimme a Hug, Die Tryin', and Nokia. One is a Taylor Swift knockoff song with Die Tryin'. Nokia is a Brockhampton knockoff, and Gimme a Hug is already kind of falling off the charts. It was polarizing for the first few days because he's talking about the beef and dissing Joe Budden. So all those three songs, plus the fact that, this is Drake's first real album after the beef, all of that has helped to pull off solid numbers. But again, to give him some credit, like if you want to consider it an R&B album, R&B albums don't usually perform this well on the charts in their first week. Unless you're The Weeknd, SZA, or Frank Ocean, you're dropping an R&B project, you're not usually selling that much in the first week. Look at Usher and Chris Brown's latest albums. They sold around 40 to 50,000 copies first week. You don't see Sampha heavy on the charts. You don't see Jeremiah heavy on the charts. Jacquees, Trey Songz, I think it's thanks to Drake, honestly, that R&B has really unfortunately taken a backseat within the mainstream because Drake kind of made it the standard to, merge hip-hop and R&B together. So that's kind of what we expect, which in turn has kind of fizzled out, traditional R&B from the mainstream. Plus, all the biggest R&B acts today are kind of like pop alternative R&B hybrids, right? The Weeknd, Frank Ocean, again, SZA. You can't really put them in a box of just strictly R&B. And ultimately, I wonder, right? Because after Thank Me Later came out, Drake was kind of in this weird spot because that album wasn't received the way he wanted it to be. And he actually announced that he'd be doing a strictly R&B album. I'm guessing it's because that was around the time that he first met The Weeknd, who was obviously making groundbreaking Toronto R&B and who obviously Drake leached a lot of songs off of. So maybe Drake, after discovering that new dark, moody Toronto R&B sound, decided, okay, this is the right time for me to kind of pivot and make a more R&B sounding project. He never ended up going full force on that, instead giving us Take Care, which was kind of his most R&B sounding project, but not fully R&B, obviously. Most of the R&B sounds and songs from that project coming from his collaborations with The Weeknd. And with this being his real official first R&B full-length project, it makes you think if Drake actually released a full-length R&B project way back in 2011, 2010 when he initially planned to, when he was still, in better form artistically, would it have sounded a lot better than this and would it have performed a lot better than this? I don't know, but they're saying GNX was a flop. GNX sold considerably more than this project and had half the amount of songs, making it a lot harder to sell a lot more than this project. There's no denying Kendrick is still number one when it comes to commercial dominance right now in 2025. The numbers speak for themselves. Oh, and of course, Akademiks was having a field day about this, celebrating arguably the first W Drake has taken since the beef started in the most obnoxious way possible, tweeting out, "Don't worry, I'm gonna try to talk some sense into Drake as well for his next solo album. Since y'all care about sales now, I'll convince him to sell shirts, vinyls, and every other bundle like other rappers do to get their fake numbers." Yeah, well, Akademiks, buddy, just in case too many Big Macs have entered your brain and you fail to realize the fact that this is the first album Drake actually did sell vinyls and CDs for, let me put you on game to the numbers. His vinyl and CD sales were terrible. He's only selling 22,000 actual physical sales for this week. All the sales came from his streams. Maybe there's a reason he's not selling vinyls and t-shirts like Travis Scott or Kendrick, because most people consider that a cheat code, right? Like, for example, Kendrick was really calculated. He made CDs and vinyls for GNX, but he only shipped them out the week of the Super Bowl. That way, after the Super Bowl performance, GNX shot back up to number one on the charts, and around 150,000 copies from that week of sales came from vinyls and CDs. 150,000. Think about that. Drake only did 22,000 with CDs and vinyls. Kendrick did 150,000, and that was 12 weeks after the album was released. Sorry, it was 100,000 that came from the vinyls and CDs for Kendrick's sales, and Akademiks tried to spin this as, some sort of L, saying, by the way, Kendrick's 250,000 GNX numbers this week, which, side note, again, Drake in his first week with this album is projected to sell 250,000. Kendrick in his 12th week after the Super Bowl sold 250,000 with GNX. But Akademiks said those 250,000 numbers this week were 100,000 vinyls that were pre-bought since the album dropped, but only counted this week because they were shipped, and the rest was Super Bowl inflation. But nobody cares because it's all about the finesse. Drake needs to start finessing. Again, Drake did the vinyls. He did the CDs. For the first time in 10 years, he tried the finesse. It didn't work for him. And if you want to talk Super Bowl inflation, Kendrick had the biggest Super Bowl inflation out of any halftime performance in recent memory, proving that his performance was captivating enough to draw in all these new monthly listeners, which Drake fans are chalking up to a conspiracy, and all of these extra album sales, much higher than previous Super Bowl halftime performers, showing that this performance really drew in a lot of new fans. But that's all I got for you guys today, Lobries and Gentlegrams. I think it's fair we chalk this up to Drake's first W since this entire beef. We gotta be fair, right? We gotta be fair. Obviously, Drake fans are gonna say, oh, it was a collab tape with Party. Oh, it was an R&B album. Oh, it pulled off all these numbers, even with the lawsuit, even with all the blackballing from Spotify. And then the Kendrick fans will say, oh, Kendrick did more numbers with GNX, which was a strictly rap album. Rapaholics has got to say, why don't we all just get along? Actually, I say that, but then I remember the lawsuit. Sometimes I forget as a Canadian why I go so hard on all this Drake hate. It's not just because there's been a massive dip in quality over the last 10 years. It's not just because he's oversaturated the market with this formulaic sound. It's because he's trying to destroy the essence of diss songs and rap battles with this disgusting defamation case. And for that, I'll say, enjoy your first W while you have it, OV-Hos, because UMG will most definitely have the last laugh in court. And I wanted that to be the mic drop, but I also wanted to say that unless some big news comes out, I'm going to try to bring you guys some different topics. Like, I'm working on this breakdown of Joe Budden and Drake's relationship stemming all the way back to 2009. I want to touch on the creation of some of my favorite albums like Lil Wayne's The Carter series, Kanye's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. I'm working on a little documentary on Bone Thugs and Harmony, the come up of some of my favorite hip hop labels of the last few decades. I got some exciting stuff for you guys. Drop a comment what other topics you want to see covered. Let me know if you think this first week is Drake's first W since his beef with Kendrick, or if it's still an L, and I will catch you guys in the next one.